Welcome, everybody. I, Councilmember Tola Martz, call the Tuesday, September 19th, 2023 City Council Services, Safety, and Parks Committee to order. Public comment. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There's a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after the presentation and council question and answer period on each of tonight's agenda items. Members of the public may address council at this time in person or virtually. Those who signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you're joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand. To do this, if you're on the phone, press *3. If you've joined by computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. I will wait for a moment to see if anyone wishes to raise their virtual hand. Anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Yes, Chair Martz. Jessica Clausen has signed up and is attending virtually.
Great. Citizen comments are an important part of the public process. We take them seriously and factor them into the decisions we make. Please direct comments to the whole council and not individuals. While this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. When recognized, unmute your microphone. State your name, address, or relationship to the city, speak clearly and pause frequently, and please limit comments to 5 minutes. If you are attending virtually and do not respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if able. Personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior will not be permitted. Clerk, can you identify the first person who has signed up to speak?
Yes, Chair Martz. Jessica Clausen is the first speaker. Ms. Clausen, I'm making you a panelist. You should be able to unmute and turn on your camera.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hello, council members. And actually, I can do my camera too, sorry. Let me do that the nice way. I think you can see me now. Okay, hello, everybody. I'm speaking to agenda item 4A, the Pioneer Program. Thank you for the consideration of the program. It is concerning, as we've discussed in the last meeting, that Issaquah has not had substantial development in the central Issaquah area per its own plan. We've reviewed the staff report and the recommendations, and we do have some comments tonight. First, we think you should decide to proceed with the Pioneer Program and work with Arch and other stakeholders to get details refined as it moves through the council process. We do believe a Pioneer Program should include some additional level of financial analysis that will show that it will allow projects to move ahead. Otherwise, it will be a waste of effort and development in central Issaquah is unlikely to occur. This financial analysis can be done in the next months as this moves along through the council process. Second, as you discussed tonight, please consider a few things. The number of units allowed within the Pioneer project should be enough to get at least a couple of full projects in. The number of units currently contemplated, 200 in the urban core and 100 in the mixed-use zones, will individually not even cover a full project. So 200 in the urban core, that's not enough for a full project. 100 in the mixed-use zone, that's also not enough for a full project. In Kirkland, they recently passed a Pioneer project for the first 624 units, which would cover approximately 2 projects in the 85th Street station area. If it could accommodate a third, that would be even better. I believe that 600 is the minimum amount of units necessary for a successful program, so you can get at least 2 projects in. Next, affordable units should be at a level that a development project can afford to provide. Otherwise, the Pioneer project will fail to attract projects. Based on my experience representing many clients throughout Puget Sound, we see all of the affordability programs around, as well as SRM development and Runberg Architecture's experience in many of these same markets. The current affordable housing recommendation in your packet tonight at 12%, 12.5% at 60% AMI would not be feasible. That program would have failed to attract projects, and I think the whole point of the project is to attract projects. As I stated before, we'd like the opportunity to work with Arch to come up with a recommendation that both delivers affordable housing and is also feasible to build. Right now, we are thinking that that would probably be at the 80% AMI level. But again, we would like to continue to work with Arch and the city to refine that as we move ahead. We're very supportive of the utilization of the MFTE program. Again, we'd like to work with Arch about how MFTE might work in Issaquah, layered with the inclusionary housing requirements to get more affordability. Finally, we're aware that the Pioneer Project didn't recommend this, but we do think council should consider a partial waiver, either a full waiver or a partial waiver of impact fees under the Pioneer program. Issaquah's impact fees are the second highest in the entire Puget Sound region. And for an average 300 unit apartment building, impact fees are about $6 million. That's a huge cost for a project, and the cost is due at the outset of construction. Waiving these fees could allow a project to provide more affordable housing. As we've talked before, a development project is basically a math problem. And if we can make the math work by waiving impact fees, we might be able to find more affordable housing. Thank you for your consideration on the Pioneer Project. We do think it's a really good idea. We're delighted you're thinking about it. And we hope that you'll use the development community as a resource as you continue to consider it and refine it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Clerk, is there anyone else either signed up or indicating that they wish to comment?
Chair Martz, Brian Runberg had signed up to speak. Mr. Runberg, I don't see your hand raised at this time. Did you wish to wait until after the staff presentation? All right. Mr. Runberg, I'm making you a panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Yeah, hi. No, I think happy to just chime in with what Jessica Clausen just spelled out. We appreciate hearing that you're considering this. I think it's a great idea, especially in the near the station overlay, and I have no further comments at this time.
All right, thank you very much. Clerk, I take it there's no one else to
Chair
speak?
Martz, we have no further people signed up or in attendance that have indicated a desire to speak at this time.
Thank you. So I guess at this point, we'll move on to approval of minutes. Have the minutes been read, and is there a motion?
Chair Martz, I move that we approve the minutes as presented for August 9th, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Joe had seconded it. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 3-0. Next, we will move on to our agenda. First on the agenda is ID 1531, Pioneer Program. It's going to be presented by Jen Davis-Hayes, our Economic Development Manager. Jen, take it away.
My mic on. Good evening. Thank you, council members. It's almost as bad as the mute on your Teams call. Thank you for having us here tonight. Our first agenda item will be about the Pioneer Program, and you may have noticed that it is separated from the affordable housing funding conversation as it was together in the past, partially because the Pioneer Program isn't an affordable housing program. While there is affordable housing provided, the intent is to help incentivize first in market. So I wanted to separate that out so that we have a clear delineation of the two different programs. And both programs actually have a separate path if we proceed as far as next steps. So again, appreciate the conversation that we've had here over the last few months. And so taking that feedback over the last few months, we worked with Arch. So I should mention that Mike Stanger is here from Arch, and he'll be presenting as part of this conversation as well, the analysis that we did. And as the public commenters mentioned, we will continue to work with the development community, and actually have talked about setting up a time where we sit down and look at each other's numbers and really better understand for Arch, for their model, as well as for them, the development community, about what we feel is necessary in order to move forward. So that is something that will continue to move on. So we'll talk tonight about that analysis. We'll also talk about the question about the MFTE, the multifamily tax exemption program impact, as well as really want to hear if there's any additional feedback you have about the program recommendation. And so, again, tonight, really looking to get some feedback from you, making sure that we understand what information is necessary to proceed, and really thinking that if council members agree to move this on to the Planning Policy Commission and the Economic Vitality Commission process to work out the details and come back with something that is, again, further refined and able to know that it will at least work as intended. So again, this is just the background for those of you who may be joining for the first time. This program was recommended in the adopted Central Issaquah plan, but was not implemented. We started talking about it in April, and again, we're continuing to talk about it. And our favorite slide, looking at the housing continuum. This program really looks at the affordable rental and the market rate spectrum of it. So that's where this fits. Again, there's lots of programs to deal with every piece of the housing continuum, but this program is really about that upper end there. So back in August, we were here, and there's a general agreement about the continue to explore, but wanted further analysis. Again, we're going to talk about the details of the analysis tonight, but we won't be talking in detail about those additional amenities and all those details. Again, we're hoping that we can work those details out with the Planning Policy Commission and Economic Vitality Commission. We heard from you that is really important to be looking at those things, which include sustainability, access to the natural environment, ground floor retail, and looking at 80 to 120% AMI housing. So we will, again, continue to work on the details of that with our friends in Planning Policy and Economic Vitality Commissions. So we do have an updated recommendation. This was the recommendation that we provide previously. So in general, there's a limit of the number of units. There was an adjustment to the affordability. There was a provision of the multifamily, and then there was a developer selected benefit from a city menu. We have some updates to recommend tonight to this program, again, partially through the ARCH analysis to date, and I think, again, we can continue to refine this. The recommendation tonight that we'll be talking about is to continue the inclusionary zoning affordability. And so that, so some folks may know, and it was mentioned tonight, that that is a required affordable housing requirement for all developments within the urban core and mixed use area. So in the urban core, it's 12.5% at 60%. Or 10% at 50% AMI. So lots of numbers, but it's something that's required, and it's for the life of the project. We made it looking at the analysis, we decided to pick the example that kept that 60% AMI, but removed the additional affordability requirement for the development bonus program. So that is what's required once you go above the base height or the FAR, floor area ratio. And that requires affordable housing at 80% and at 50%. So with those changes, the state law requires you to have a certain number of percentage of units to have a 12-year MFTE, so that didn't meet the requirements, so it went to 8. So lots of little tweaks as we got into the analysis of seeing what we could do. As we were discussing, and Mike from ARCH says, hey, wait a minute, is this the 200 residential units that you mentioned here and the 100 residential units in mixed use, is that, there was a misconception or mismatch of understanding if that was affordable units or full, complete units. And so I wanted to say that out loud here tonight and also kind of get some feedback on that of making sure we're on the same page, that that whether it's 200 full units of the entire project. Again, having notes up here on the slide, basically mentioning, which Jesse mentioned, that most of our project, our development of housing have been more than 200 and closer to 300 plus range. So if we really wanted to utilize this program as a spark, does it make better sense to say 2 projects? Does it make better sense to increase that number? And that's something that we would appreciate some feedback on tonight. And clarity on what, what you may have thought that would be and if that changed things. So again, just want to make sure that understand why we're changing our recommendation tonight, and it will continue to be refined. One of the important things is with the development bonus interpretation, there was a clarification from our planning staff where instead of 53 units of additional housing, it was really only 12 that was required. So both the developer and myself read it one way and it was interpreted a different way. So again, one of those things when you start really going into the numbers, seeing how that changes. So I'm going to invite Mike to join us for the description of the analysis. But I want to just again thank the Runberg and SRM team. They provided us some high-level data about their project. So we use those numbers and the land value and the unit ratio to do this analysis. So we understand that we're not creating this pioneer program for this project, but it had something in real life that we could play with the numbers and see what makes sense. We use some data from current rental rates for a project here in Issaquah to make sure that it aligned. So Mike, ask you to go ahead and join and take it away, and let me know when you want me to change the slides. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Jen. Good evening, council members. I'm really happy to be with you for this discussion tonight, and look forward to working through and helping us all understand how these programs can work for a benefit of this community. The analysis that we've done for this case is something that we've done for a number of our member communities over many years. And each time we learn more about how things work and how we can improve the process. And so this time we've actually taken 2 approaches to it. One is what I would characterize as a more typical for Arch public perspective. And that is to try to answer the question, what value is the city creating for landowners, and how much affordability can the community capture from it for affordable housing while still leaving a net benefit for the owner? And we do this by, evaluating things like the increased development capacity or density that the landowners would enjoy, the tax exemption if that's part of the program. And we would then divide that by the increase in affordable units to get a value that the landowner would be getting per affordable unit. We'd compare that to what we call a rent gap, or the value of the affordable housing is the difference between the market rent and the affordable rent. And we take that on an average per affordable unit. And then we can balance the two again, compare the two, and try to make sure that the public is getting a satisfactory amount of affordability, and at the same time, the benefits are still netting positive for developers and landowners. So that's one approach, the public perspective. The other one, which we've taken on more recently, is more of a developer perspective on things, and that is just trying to understand what effect is a proposal for upzoning, for MFTE, and the affordable housing, et cetera, have on the feasibility of a typical project. So it's trying to give us some insight on the financial viability of these projects. We can't, unfortunately, really predict for you, what the bottom line will be for any given developer or project. we're trying to increase our understanding of this, but we won't be able to assure you that if the council does that certain development will happen. That depends on a whole lot of other factors. So that's kind of the setup for this. Jen, how about the next slide? Thanks. So we looked at or focused on three scenarios that would take us, that would be considered pioneer catalyst kinds of projects in that they vary from the existing code. And the first one would be to take a project that could build with the inclusionary zoning, with the density bonus, but add a tax exemption benefit. And since with the in the scenarios that we tested, that would work out to be a total of about 14% of the units would be affordable. So it would only qualify under state law for an 8-year tax exemption. Not you have to get to 20% affordable units to be able to offer a 12-year tax exemption. So Pioneer 1 is the same code that you have now, but you're just offering a tax exemption on top of that. The second alternative would be similar, but you wouldn't require any affordability for the development bonus or for the density bonus. It would just be getting the inclusionary affordability, what was characterized as 12.5% at 60% of median income. And then the third option would be kind of like the first one. You get affordable units for the density bonus as well as inclusionary, but instead of having a mix of 50, 60, and 80 AMI units, you would just make all of them affordable at 80% of median. Let's go on to the next. Jen? So as Jen mentioned, we were using the one of the proposals developers that we've spoken to as kind of a model for or a prototype, hoping that will represent similar projects throughout the Central Issaquah district. And in this case, the development capacity comes to 27% increase in dwelling units. The current city code would require a project like that to set aside, 12.5%, as Jen said, of the units, so 60% of median. If you do the density, get the 27% density bonus, then that 12.5% works out to about 10% of the total new project. And then the density bonus requires another more affordable housing with a mix of 50 and 80% units. So in our example here, you'd end up with 29 units at 60 AMI, 4 at 80, and 8 at 50% of median. And then we ran numbers. So let's skip to the next one, please. We'll come back to the MFTE. Yeah. So we ran numbers through those two models. And I should say that referring back to the comment about impact fee waivers, you may know this already, but City of Issaquah has been really generous with giving impact fee waivers and other fee waivers, permit fees and so forth for affordable housing. And so we factored those into this analysis. Basically, the affordable units are exempt from impact fees and virtually all the development fees. So again, the Pioneer 1 is the current code. with the added benefit of an 8-year tax exemption. Pioneer 2 is similar. You get the tax exemption, but you don't have to do the extra affordable units for the development bonus. And then Pioneer 3 is you do provide the extra affordable units, but all of the affordable units are 80% of median. In other words, a higher affordability level instead of the mix of 50, 60, and 80. And what we found, the measurement that we're showing here is called yield on cost. What that is technically is the ratio of the net operating income of a project to the total development costs in 1 year. The first sorry, I'm forgetting the word. The first settled year or established year of a project. They could measure the success of a project based on this yield on cost. There are other measures as well that various developers use. We just happen to be using this one. And what we found with these scenarios in this example project is that all three improved or appear to improve the feasibility above the baseline. That is the project that could be built under the current code without any density bonus. So the first alternative gave us an 11% increase on yield on cost. Pioneer 2 and 3 are about 13% better than the baseline on that measure.
So, sorry, Mike, say again for me. What's
Yes,
what's the numerator and what's the denominator on that 11% and the or 13 or 13? The yield on cost change?
The yield on cost change, right? So
What's the numerator and what's the denominator?
well, for the change, of course, it's the yield on cost for the Pioneer project, and the denominator is the yield on cost of the baseline project.
Sorry,
But I think you might be asking
in practical terms, is it the value of the value of the subsidized housing is the numerator and the cost of the project is the denominator? Or the cost of the yeah, that's what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, yield on cost is the ratio of the net operating income of the total.
I don't know
project.
what net operating income means.
That means all of the income that the project is making from rents and fees and so forth after subtracting out their operating costs.
So it's how much money they're making on their project?
Yes, basically, right.
Okay, I'm not a finance person. I'm just a rocket scientist. So I don't understand any of this stuff. So
that's okay. I barely understand it myself. To get the yield on cost, then you divide that net operating income by the total cost of developing the project. So all the hard costs, all of the and the soft costs that they pay the engineers and the architects and everything that went into the building the project.
So does this say that if we did Pioneer 1, they'd get an increased 11% yield on their investment?
No, it means that the project is performing about 11% better than it would be if they just built the project that the minimum project that they could do without the density bonus.
Okay, I thought that's what I said, but okay, there must be some difference. So they do 11% better with that if we did that, they do 13% better with Pioneer 2, they do 13% better with Pioneer 3. Is that how I can
Right.
read that?
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
But I would caution not to focus on the precise number as much as are being able to say that we think that there's some significant improvement offered by these pioneer projects.
And they're of a comparable benefit, more or less. 11 and 13
More or less.
are similar numbers. They're one's bigger than the other, but they're squint at them and look at them, you know, and hit yourself in the head with a hammer, and they're about the same.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure. And then just to touch on the MFTE impact, these figures are based on a 300 unit prototype that would get an 8-year exemption on taxes. So all of the residential improvement values would be tax exempt, the new residential improvement values. The land and any commercial or non-residential improvement values would remain taxable. So, for instance, sometimes we will see a mixed-use building go up. The dwelling units are exempt. The residential parking is exempt, but the commercial space, the commercial parking is still taxable. The land is still taxable. What happens during the tax exemption is that the assessor continues to appraise the values of the residential improvements, but they won't add it to the tax roll. It's if the new housing doesn't exist until the MFTE expires. And when the tax exemption expires, then the assessor adds it to the rolls.
And Mike,
So,
who are the other agencies in this?
Who are the other agencies that would give the tax exemption?
Yeah, if we're basically somebody else is chipping in 10 times what we are towards this. Who's that somebody else?
Well, it's all of any agency that or jurisdiction that taxes real property. So the school
Such
district.
as. Okay.
So if there's library, the state, everybody who collects ad valorem property taxes would be foregoing the revenue on those
But
projects.
that's more than half is school district, right?
I think so. I don't have those figures open to me right now, but
Okay, thank you.
I can provide that at a later
county
time.
is another big one.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I said King County is another one. Of course.
Thank you.
So, so if we have 300 units, a typical value per unit that would be taxable is somewhere around $400,000. At your current tax rate, we calculated that and then increased it 1% a year, as if you were reaching the levy cap each year over 8 years, and then discounted it to the present value. That would likely mean a $6.2 million tax savings for the owner over 8 years. For the city's part, the city would forego $69,000 a year, each year for 8 years. But that density bonus, that plus the density bonus, I should say, the taxes and density bonus gains the city the affordable housing. As long as the housing lasts, that would be affordable. And then, of course, you get taxes and fees from construction value, any taxes, sales taxes that the residents generate or employees on the site, and potentially increased property taxes on the land or commercial value over time.
Thank you, Mike.
So
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We didn't, Jen and I were anticipating that, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but we would look forward to having a more focused discussion on MFTE when you're ready to do that.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mike.
back to
Yes,
you,
and I
Jen.
think we'll be back at the October 9th City Council Committee of the Whole to talk about our affordable housing update and how plans to look at what things they plan to look at next year, which could be MFTE if the City Council would like to do that. So getting back to our recommendation, we're recommending Pioneer 2. And I will say that reminder that this project is meant to, and I have the quote here from Central Issaquah Plan, really to help those that are first in the market area. It still would create 29 units of at 60% AMI. And really, I think what we would like to hear from council is that there is a desire and agreement to move forward with creating a pioneer program that, again, provides incentives. So whether that's a financial incentive through the multifamily tax exemption, reduced affordability, or some other components as we, again, work with the Planning Policy Commission and Economic Vitality Commission to figure that out. That's really what we'd like to better understand tonight to move forward on this. And then, again, come back after the commission has reviewed it for continued discussion at the committee level or full council meeting. Thank you.
Jen, you had some information on comps in here. Do you want to speak to, it's not, you don't have it in your slide deck, but you have it in the memo. Do you want to speak to that?
To the comps for...
Kenmore, Kirkland, and Redmond?
Oh, okay. So that's the Pioneer Program examples that we presented before. And actually, as the public commenter mentioned, Kirkland just did adopt a new Pioneer Program because this was actually completed already. So in Kenmore, they reduced parking in their transit-oriented development overlay zone, and they had allowed it for the first 100 units in there, and nobody utilized that. In Kirkland, they reduced the affordability for the first 200 units, and that development happened then in the Totem Lake Center, so real next to the commercial center. Again, they were trying to build that community, so that was positive. They reduced, again, less affordability, and that moved forward. And then Redmond, they also reduced affordability in the Overlake Village zone, and that was for the first affordable units, affordable units. And so 3 residential developments utilized all those Pioneer units. And in both Kirkland and Redmond, now projects are moving forward in the market and the requirements that are currently out there. So again, a Pioneer program is not intended to be the where we stand forever as far as the requirements. It's meant to show in the market that it can work, and it actually we've seen that actually happen already in Issaquah with you can see when after Atlas happened, lots of the Newport Way developments kind of decided, hey, okay, this looks like this is possible. So currently in the urban core and the mixed use zones in Central Issaquah, we have one apartment community built in 10 years. And so this would jumpstart, the hope is to jumpstart that housing development where we want to see that focus around amenities and jobs and transit.
And when you say shallower affordability for Kirkland and lowered affordability in
Yeah,
Redmond, what do you mean
those
specifically?
Are same words. So reduce. So like we were saying, 80% down or 60% up to 80%. So that's shallower or lowered. They use those terms interchangeably.
So in both of those cases, they went from 60 to 80?
I need to look at that. So I do believe, but I don't want to, I remember putting this in April. So let me confirm that and get back to you.
Okay.
I have those in somewhere.
All right. Other questions before we take public comment? Barb, you look like you have some questions.
Yeah, I bet maybe Russell does too. Yeah, I have several questions. Jen, you said that you're going to talk to developers, but you haven't so far. Am I clear about that? What kind of input have the developers had?
Yeah, so I should say we will continue. So at the beginning of this process, and I apologize for the way I said that. At the beginning of the process, I spoke to 8 different development firms about either some that have developed here, some that were looking here and walked away, and some that are currently looking here. And this was again in the beginning of the process to find out, okay, why aren't you developing here? What would help? And it was very clear that some of the requirements to them made it seem infeasible to develop. And so that's kind of what started the ball, along with a request to explore the Pioneer program. So when we say we're going to continue to have those conversations, as Mike mentioned from Arch, that every time we have another conversation helps the whole table learn more about what really is happening. So Runberg and SRM and Arch have just this morning talked about sitting down and talking, going over numbers. I had another call from a different developer today that, again, expressed interest in the Pioneer program, but didn't think that this 60% AMI was feasible. So we will continue to have those conversations, because the reality is I don't want to create something, we don't want to spend all this time creating something that is not financially feasible. And so that's the biggest thing. There's other factors in here about how you get your financing, how long the affordability is, that we'll look at incorporating into the final recommendation.
So I'll come back to that, because I have some overall questions about just how we arrived at the 60% recommendation. But so we had a correspondence today from several people, constituents, and then we heard the testimony. What would be the consequences of doubling the numbers? And actually, I believe Jessica was advocating for tripling the numbers that we've got in our recommendation. What would be the impact of that? With that, I know it would be a tax foregoing for us of more consequence, but what would be some of the other programmatic consequences? Would that open it up to more developers, or would that simply mean a larger development? Or what do you think that would accomplish if we were to increase the availability of this program?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head, that it could be larger development or it could be multiple developments. And so looking at the example of the Runberg project, they're looking just under 300, so that if we raised it to 600 or 700, it would allow, another similar size apartment community. For relativity, so Atlas is 344 units. There's an apartment community that was, our apartment developer that was looking at building 350 units. The transit-oriented development is about 350. So again, that's what you are seeing in the market. There are a few properties that could redevelop at a larger scale, but very few. And right now they have shopping centers that are earning income on them. So there's not a likelihood that they're going to immediately shut down and redevelop. But again, we would go out once this is passed. One of the things I plan to do is to do robust outreach to property owners and inform them about this tool, other tools we're working on. And again, part of this is to start the conversation about what would help you move forward to develop and also then develop affordable housing with the Strategic Opportunity Fund. So
when we were talking about the analysis, and I've been talking to people in the community about and hearing that construction costs are going up by 25 to 30% in some cases on some of the projects that are underway. And so, and taking into account that it takes maybe 3 to 5 years to get a project all the way through. Does our analysis take into account the impact of possibly continuing inflation at the rate it is today?
I'm going to let Mike answer that, because I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. And maybe
it's
can I add to that, Mike? Does it make any difference? Maybe the inflation is going up and it doesn't make a difference. So I'll add that to that question.
It's a great question. And I'll confess that I can't predict the future any better than anybody else. The analysis uses the best current data that we have, that we've gained through a lot of stakeholder input. The best current information that we have about costs of development. We try to build in some wiggle room, so to speak, that allows for some margin of error. But if things are dramatically different 5 years from now, then the current model might not have done a great job of predicting the future, and it's really describing current circumstances.
Okay, thanks.
Frankly, developers face the same problem.
Yeah, that's my question of maybe that does not make a difference. So I learned something new tonight, and that is I didn't realize that if we impose, or if we not impose, but if we give a development MFTE, that takes taxes away from the school district. Does the school district know that? I did not know that. So that is an impact, especially if that is an development that brings in young children.
Right, it's foregone revenue, so it doesn't
Yeah.
reduce it, yes. But yes,
Yes.
they'd have to serve more of the residents if there are children, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that was new information for me. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing the right thing. So let me circle back to my last question then. So we've heard over and over and over from our developers that the 60% AMI just does not pencil out for them, and we have a recommendation tonight that we stick with the 60%. So could I hear the rationale for sticking with the 60%?
Sure. So when we looked at that yield over cost, is that the right terms I'm using? Looking at the 60% and the 80%, the recommendation made last time and then the revised one, it appeared that the impact was relatively similar. And looking at 60% is we have less 60% units in the community than maybe 80 or 100, 20. So that was the rationale. Again, after getting feedback and talking more through the analysis, the tool, again, I think there's some room to really look at how to adjust that. So while on paper, last week, we are recommending this, I think the real recommendation that I'm hoping for out of this committee is to say, we want to do a pioneer program. We are giving you this guardrails, this kind of guidance of where we feel comfortable and what's important to us, and go to PPC and EVC and figure out the 60, 70, 10%, 4%. And again, continuing the conversation with the community, continuing the conversation with Arch and our city leaders to make sure that we are able to impact along the spectrum of housing. So it does feel like it's not 100% complete yet as a recommendation, and so see that as a little bit of a let us continue to massage these numbers and again create something that will be used if that's what City Council wants.
Sorry, may I add on a little bit there?
Please
comparing the three pioneer options, to answer your question a little bit more directly, the first option is the affordability that would be required under the current code. The second option does away with the affordable units for the development to get the density bonus. So that's a little bit less affordability in terms of units. The difference between Pioneer 2 and Pioneer 3, by raising, even though there are more affordable units, by raising the affordability level to 80% of median, the overall value of those units goes down for the community. So you're getting less affordable housing value from Pioneer 3 than you do in Pioneer 2. So that's why we are leaning towards recommending Pioneer 2.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember DiMichele, do you have any other questions at this time?
No.
Councilmember Joe, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. First, Mike and Jen, I really appreciate the presentation this evening. As you can probably tell, all three of us are not finance majors, and we're not necessarily in the construction business, and you've helped us kind of put this in tangible terms. So do appreciate that. Going back to the Kenmore example in the table that you had, they reduced their parking requirements, but didn't see any affordable units being built or any projects that took that up. Are we similar to Kenmore in that area, and the idea that reducing a parking requirement probably wouldn't move the needle too much for us? Is my first question.
Again, the Kenmore example was to get development, so not so much affordable but I do know that we have a relatively low parking ratio, so 0.75 per unit in this area in the urban core. So reducing that even farther doesn't seem to move the needle, and I've heard that directly from developers that the parking ratio is not a discernible factor at this time. That was some changes that happened as part of Title 18. It was relatively lower in central Issaquah than it was in downtown and some other areas, but during Title 18 updates, it was reduced farther. Affordable units also get a reduction of parking requirements, and if you're near a transit center, you get a reduction. So there are some opportunities if a development went across the street from the transit center to have some reductions if that was what they chose to do. But we also know that in the market, you need to build to what you can rent. And so if you don't have enough parking, it's going to be harder to rent. So that may be a little bit of an answer for that. Again, not every developer has the same needs, but that's the information we've heard from the developers I've talked to. I don't know if, Mike, if you've heard anything different with our new updated requirements.
No, I've heard very similar input.
Thank you. And was the Atlas development built under the standards that you just went over for parking, or were they different? It was
before. So that was before the moratorium and before Title 18 updates. So it was different standards, but they were the original Central Issaquah standards. And one thing I also wanted to mention is that the parking and then structured parking are two different, requirements. And as part of the Eco Northwest analysis that the planning department did, they are going to and want to in 2024, and they'll talk about this on October 9th, further study what those levers are, because when you change one thing, it doesn't always just mean, okay, now it's ready. So we're going to be looking at all of these components and if we reduce the requirement for structured parking, does that make it more feasible? Again, that's something that's coming up.
Okay. No, thank you. Appreciate that. If we follow the recommendation outlined here, I think you mentioned that the city and Arch would get together, possibly some additional developers, to continue the conversation about some additional changes or things that could be modified to make the project feasible. But how long do you anticipate that taking? Do you think you can get back by October 9th with those type of modifications?
I wish. No, we would have to work with our Planning Policy Commission staff to find out when they have a very heavy loader ready with the comp plan, but we would find time to go in and also work with the Economic Vitality Commission, which is finishing or just diving into their economic development plan as well. So it would not be for the 8th. or the 9th, I'm sorry, of October. Again, I would have to see what the schedule looks like and maybe come back in November with some, additional, I'm not even sure if that's enough time. But
Okay.
we would go to PPC and EVC as soon as possible to begin these discussions, because it's not going to be a one meeting discussion.
Okay, and so what are you bringing back on October 9th then?
Yeah, great question. So on October 9th, it's the update we were at the committee, council committee of the whole in April, I believe, March, April. And so you will hear from our Kristen Leeson from planning, long-range planning. You'll hear from Monica Negregro from Human Services and myself about the components that we discussed at that time. So what's happening for the housing strategy work plan updates, and there might be some questions for council members of what's most important to look at and to pursue. Monica will provide an update about the shelter program. And what I planned on doing is bringing forward our next topic, which is the Affordable Housing Fund, to, again, talk about it with the full council and potentially move forward. I did plan on mentioning the Pioneer Program, but didn't plan to focus on that. But if that's something that you feel needs to be a focus, again, it wouldn't have any more details than we would have tonight.
Okay, so just so I have it clear in my mind, you want us to put some suggestions and guardrails on a program tonight, potentially, that would be discussed by the Planning Policy Commission and our planning department. It wouldn't be reported back in October, but those conversations would be ongoing, and then you would report back to us when the program was a little more firm. Is that the lay of the land?
Yes, sir. And I
Okay.
guess I want to make sure that we, I think there's let's explore. Does this make sense to do? So obviously, if we're going to invest our time going through the rest of this process, we are dedicated to do it. We're ready to do it. If there are any heartburn, consternation about not doing this, I would love to hear that now and what that is, because it is something that, Mike has done. I think he originally had 6 different, analysis items, and we're going to be diving into this, and we really want to put the time in, but we also, it isn't just to say, okay, that looks good, but we really aren't interested in this. So if you're interested in sparking development in the urban core or mixed use areas, we're ready to do that work and figure it out.
Okay, and I guess my final question concerns the 60% AMI versus 80% AMI discussion that we've been having. It seems to me, and it's just experience that I'm seeing on the ground, that more projects are being built if the AMI is at 80%, and projects are not getting built or started if the AMI is at 60%. Is that something that planning is seeing, or you are seeing on the ground as well? And I guess I need to learn a little bit more about the benefits between Pioneer 2 and Pioneer 3, and why the distinction from going to 80% is not that beneficial. So I don't know if that is a coherent question.
I'll jump in and then let Mike jump in more holistically. So in the city, we haven't had any 80% AMI developed under the inclusionary or the development bonus, except for Vail. And they are in a different zone than these two, so they didn't have inclusionary required. And so they actually developed with the development bonus program. And so I think that Mike does have a list looking at the east side about projects that are at 50 and 60%. Again, every project has a little different. There might have been some land donation, there might have been this and that, but I'll let Mike talk about that broader, what he's seeing in the region.
Sure, and I'd be happy to come back with as much detail as you'd like, but over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been quite a bit of development in multifamily development in Kirkland and Redmond. And although the parameters of those programs vary a little bit from what we've talked about tonight, virtually all of it has been has produced affordable housing. 10% or more of the units at 50% or 60% of median. So not true at all that developers won't build with 50 or 60 AMI. It happens quite a bit.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that clarification.
And I'd like to clarify my answer. I'm focused on Central Issaquah. We did have affordable housing built up in the Highlands, and so I don't want to portray that we hadn't had any affordable housing built recently. My zoomed in is in Central Issaquah comment.
Councilmember Jim Michelle.
Just a quick question. Does Bellevue have a Pioneer program, or are they operating something else? But I was just wondering why, because they have been building a lot of different interesting projects in Bellevue. So I was just wondering why they weren't included in this comparison.
Mike, do you want to answer that? All right.
Sure. Bellevue's code is an approach to affordable housing with land use and tax exemption is quite a bit different than our other cities, and based primarily on the fact that they prefer everything to be voluntary. And so their affordability levels are higher, 80% AMI generally. And so there's since they're not requiring anything, there's no need to relax the voluntary incentives to get more. They're already voluntary.
That is really interesting. Thank you for that information.
Do either of my fellow council members have any further questions before we take public comment ahead of discussing the proposed recommendation? Then, Clerk, I would ask if there's interest in the public in making comment on this item.
Chair Martz, I'm not seeing any virtual hands raised. Oh, there we go. Ryan Runberg. Mr. Runberg, I'm making you a panelist. You can now turn on your camera and address the committee.
Great, thank you. To your points, I'm not the financial analyst in our group either, but just wanted to follow up on a couple things the council members mentioned. One on costs, because we do have a very relevant data on that. The multifamily cost in projects of this size, in the roughly 250, 300 unit range, has risen 25% in 3 years. To give you some ideas, we've seen it start to stabilize, but it hasn't much yet. The clarification, as I understand it on the MFT, it depends on which, either if the 8-year is selected or the 12-year is selected. Either one have different options with it, but that's a temporary abatement of those taxes for that period in exchange for the affordable units for the life of the project. So it's a temporary hit, but a long-term gain, and that's part of the formula that we're balancing or can navigate and collaborate here with Arch on what makes that work. I do want to bring up another thing on the parking ratio, just to give a little bit more context to that. So the light rail is roughly 15 years out, and to meet the market, it's going to need to be close to 1-to-1 until the light rail is there. Otherwise, it's going to be the worst thing to happen is not to have enough parking, and then you won't get the renters. So we would analyze that. We don't want to overbuild it, but don't want to underbuild it. So that's a key thing. And then we're in this example that we're muddling through. But nonetheless, we had met with Mike and Arch this morning, and Jen started the dialogue. We've got some different ideas and sharing information back. And I know from our point, we already have these models built and can move fairly quickly on this, and we can bring you something back. in October. And I can't speak for Arch or on Jen's side, but I'm just saying we kind of can work through this pretty swiftly, at least to have some more data points by October. So happy to do that. Appreciate Mike reaching out to us, and like to continue that dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Clerk, is there anyone else wishing to speak this evening on this topic?
Chair Martz, I'm seeing no more virtual hands raised at this time.
All right. Thank you. We'll go into deliberation on this item. Who would like to start? Councilmember DiMichele?
Do we want to go forward with the Pioneer program? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So I am not going to, wipe my hands free of it after you guys have done a lot of work. I think it was something that was recommended in the central plan, and obviously has some value because we've seen that there hasn't been any desired development in that central area, and that is what we want to do to build that density towards the day when we have the light rail coming through. I heard clearly from our constituents about the bigger and bolder, about increasing the number of units that this program would be available to, and it made a lot of sense to me. If we're going to do this and put the work in and want to encourage this, we need to make it realistic to what would be an average development, and why not do 2 or 3 instead of just 1? So I agree with that. So let's look, at least my recommendation would be to look at how we can increase the number of units that the program would be available to. I was really heartened by your words, Jen, about we don't want to work on this, put it out, and then nothing happens. We want to make sure that when this goes out the door, that it's going to be something that our developers see as feasible and that they are eager to get involved with and want to build, because we really need this, the housing that this would bring and the affordable housing that it would bring and so forth. So I think I spoke in favor of the 80% before. I will speak in favor of it now, but with the caveat that if there is a different mix of options that works for the developers, then I would be open to leaving it at 60% if there's something else that works. I have to say I was taken aback because it worries me that we're taking tax dollars away from a school district that could be experiencing the impacts of a great number of young people in their schools, and then not giving them the taxes that they need. School districts are struggling right now, and that's not going to correct itself for a while. So at any rate, certainly open to the 80%. But if something else works, and our developers think that it works and it pencils out for them, then good. Yeah, if we stick to our guns and we put something out that doesn't work, and when you take into account the number of years it takes to get a development from planning to final construction and opening up the doors, I don't want to delay this unnecessarily by putting in a requirement that developers aren't going to be eager to take advantage of. So those are my thoughts. Want to thank everybody who's put a lot of work into this. It was in discussion today, and I do think that this is a pivotal discussion. The message that we're sending, that we really are serious about development in the central area, I think is really important. And I'm hopeful that the council will look at putting this program in place as a message that we are very, very serious about developing the central district. So thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Councilmember Joe?
Thank you. Whoa. thank you for the great presentation. I think that we all recognize that Issaquah is changing, and with increased densities being necessary because land is restricted. As we look at the future of Issaquah and where we want our growth to occur, we certainly have some great neighborhoods that we want to keep as residential neighborhoods, Talus, Squaw Mountain. But if we put the density in the valley floor, which was kind of one of the general concepts for the Central Issaquah plan, we need to provide ways that developers and people that want to build the housing can make it pencil out. So I think the Pioneer program is one way that we can make that possible. So I'm in favor of the program, and I'm also in favor of doing at least 2 projects. My fellow council member, Barbara Michelle, ventured to say 3, and I certainly would be in favor of that if it does make sense for all parties involved. I would ask us to continue to look for the best ways to keep the MFT at a level. If it can be 12% and we qualify for it, that's great. But it does need to be part of the general equation to make this work. I also will speak in favor of having the fee waivers that we have had in the past for projects like this. It's possible that there will be some permit reform that'll be coming through, which will at least potentially shorten the timetables and timelines for developers. If we can add to that some fee waivers, maybe the project will pencil out. I think that the affordability needs to be in there. I'm personally in favor of the 80% AMI, as my fellow council member Barbara Michelle is. But if 60 makes sense and doesn't hurt or curtail the options for a person that wants to come in to do this project, then that's great. I hope that the conversation that Arch, the city, and the developer community have as they continue to look at this project will help hammer those details out a little bit more. But those are my general thoughts and comments at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joe. My thoughts. So there's this narrative that we haven't built anything in the valley in 10 years. Just a quick check. We were building like crazy, and then in 2016, which was 7 years ago, we enacted the moratorium because we were building like crazy, and we were getting lots of development, and we weren't sure it was the development that we wanted. So we put a moratorium in place. And as Councilmember DeMichelle points out, it takes some time for development to get spun up. And that moratorium ended in 2018. And then 24 months later, we had this little thing called COVID. And then we had 2 years of COVID. And I'm not sure that we can say that the development policies in the Central Issaquah plan and our strategic plan prevent development. I think that when you put in 2 years in the moratorium and then 2 years later, 2 years of COVID, I think it's been an extraordinary environment. But, you know, one of the benefits of being on council for 14 years is I saw the majority of my time on council saw ferocious growth in our city, where we took far more than our share of the, 2040 regional growth plans, right? We were the poster child for taking development. And then, like I said, we put a moratorium, and then there was COVID. So I am in favor of affordable housing. It's about the bang for the buck for me. You know, if we could invest $1 and get $10 billion of affordable housing, that would be a great investment, right? If we invested $10 billion and got $1 worth of affordable housing, that would be a terrible investment. And so any of these options that are in front of us, I think about numerators and denominators, right? And I think about what is the benefit and then what is the cost. And to me, when you talk about 60% versus 80%, sure, 80%, but give me twice as much housing. because otherwise you're having the benefit to the community, right? If you have N number of units at 60% AMI and you say N number of units at 80% AMI, you've dropped the benefit in half for the public, right? Unless you double the number of units. But on some level, I don't care. I want to know what the potential benefit is to the community in impact on housing prices for what investment we would have. And like Councilmember DiMichele, I am concerned about the tax impact of, it looks great on paper. We can take $1, we can forego $1 of revenue, and somebody else has to forego $10 in revenue. But if that's $6 from the school district, that's worth understanding. And maybe they want that. Maybe they think that's great for the community and great for the future of the schools, because they have to keep getting young families in the community, and maybe they say that's a great investment, right? I don't know. But I think it's important to understand that we would only be paying 10% of the cost of this to try to get the benefit that we want. I did hear today a statement made that we have the second highest impact fees in the Puget Sound area. If that is true, that is a whole separate topic of conversation for our council. If that is true, we should understand that. Councilmember Joe sounds like he's talking about some stuff coming out of maybe Olympia that would change fees. I don't like it when Olympia tells us what to do, but I like it when we have a competitive environment. So I want to understand that better, again, potentially for a different day. Like Councilmember DiMichele, I think, if something is a good deal, if it's a good bang for the buck, if it's a good investment, let's do more of it. If 100 units are a good investment, 200 units would be twice as much of a good investment. I'm not afraid of development if it is a sound investment, if it is public monies put in towards creating genuine, more affordable housing. So, it can't be, 1% at 99% AMI, because there's just no benefit, right? So in all these things, as we move forward, I'm very much in favor of it, but I very much want to count the cost versus count the benefit, and to have the administration come back and explain how that would work and why that would be a wise use of the community's money. Do either of my fellow council members want to have any other follow-on comments before we move to the next item? Not seeing that, we will, did the administration get what they were looking for today?
Yes, I do have a clarifying question. When you talk about the cost and the benefit in affordable housing units, so for you, does that mean showing how much rent would be for an 80% versus 60% AMI versus 120?
Yeah, 100 units, if you save, if you create units that are $1,000 less expensive and you create 10 of them, that's $10,000 a year of benefit.
So that's okay. So that's what I want to understand. You're looking at the rental difference for That's, I mean, that's one way to look at it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I think of the benefit, and that allows you to say, shallower discount versus larger number of units equals deeper discount, smaller number of units. It's the same net benefit to the community, as far as I'm concerned. Although I recognize there are arguments about how much do we have at 60%, how much need is there at 60%, how much need is there at 80%. But I think that's a level of granularity that I can't parse.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. With that, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. Give me just a second to bring it back up.
Could I make just one last comment?
Oh, sure. Councilmember Joe.
The permit reform that I was talking about was passed this last session. It was sponsored by Senator Mullet. It's Senate Bill 5290. So that law will be put into effect, and all cities will have to kind of look at that and review it. So I know we don't like when Olympia tells us what to do, but they've already told us what to do, and now our planning department's going to have to kind of take a look at that. So that's just a bit of information to fill out the debate this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for that information. Moving on to ID 1527, Affordable Housing Capital Funding. This is also Jen Davis Hayes.
Now switching to affordable housing completely. We, again, have been here in the past getting feedback on the idea to create a strategic opportunity fund to allow us when development comes comes about for affordable housing, we have the opportunity to help with that financial feasibility. So we're going to go over some of the approach tonight of the Opportunity Fund, and again, any other additional information. The next step would bring this to the City Council Committee of the Whole on October 9th, and then if there was agreement, continue developing the program and potentially, November, December, January, pass that and get that as one of our tools to move forward. So one of the things I would like also direction on is, again, for the October 9th discussion, we've already talked an hour about Pioneer program, right? What for you makes the most sense to get your city council members, your peer members, feedback or input on regarding this topic. So that would help me to refine what we're presenting. So as a reminder, this is about our HB 1590 and 1406 funds. So this is an updated slide where we did allocate $300,000 to the Arts Trust Fund, and they said, thank you very much. It's actually going to be allocated as part of this next process. And so that money will go to regional affordable housing moving forward very quickly in the region. The source of the funding has some rules about the 60% AMI or lower and certain populations. So it has defined itself where the continuum is. And we want to, make sure we invest what we have very wisely. So we want to make sure that we align it with our vision and our goals that we have beyond for the housing. But we also want to make sure, and in that, as we're thinking about it, we want to make sure that our friends, our family, and our employees have a place to live in our community. So this is going to be one tool to do that. And I think that's where, when we talk about affordable housing, it's how can this fix everything? Well, this is not going to fix everything, but this is going to be one tool for that. So again, we'll talk more of those tools on October 9th. So again, there was general agreement about how we were approaching and prioritizing the funding sources for preservation, transit-oriented development with a lowercase TOD, meaning not the project, but anything that is near high-capacity transit, and community-based partnerships, which really is about providing spaces for nonprofits, working with our faith-based community and other community organizations that are interested in helping out with this. And again, continued interest in making sure we look at equity, workforce housing, and connections to our environment. So our approach, I'm going to talk about our approach of how we are planning to do this. So again, we appreciate the council's input to this point. So we're prioritizing these types of projects, again, within the rules of the funding. And if the project has additional elements around sustainability, equitable approach, or things in our adopted plans, we would look to provide additional resources towards a project like that. And so some of those further city vision goals and adopted plans could be ground floor commercial, as mentioned in Central Issaquah, connection to open space that's in our green necklace or our parks plan, home ownership or missing middle in our housing strategy work plan, and nonprofit services, a dedicated space in our city strategic plan. So these plans already exist. Our goals have been defined. Community input has provided, council has adopted it. So I think we have a clear direction on if a project comes in and helps us achieve our goals, that makes sense to invest in. One of the things is, again, we are not, you talk about not being financial experts. We're not experts at funding affordable housing. So we are going to look at what others do. So there is a combined funders application that 11 entities in the region use, including ARCH, the Washington State Housing Trust Fund, King County Housing Finance Program, Washington State Housing Finance Commission for Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. So we would recommend utilizing that and have an addendum for Issaquah. So again, the things that we want are important to ask, and we would work with ARCH again to get this application process. So I did include a very draft version of what the addendum could look like. Knowing that the application, I also included this combined funders application, it's 38 pages already. So it does have a lot of information, the basic things you want to ask for. Includes information about equity inclusion, how it's meeting community needs. But again, our addendum would focus more on the prioritized areas and elements that meets the city's goals already. So we would work with Economic Vitality Commission and Arch to refine that, to make sure that those questions have measurable impacts and not just, oh, I like this better, but it has a real ability to choose between the different options. So again, Arch staff would help with the review and making recommendations. We're recommending that we would then take that recommendation to the Economic Vitality Commission for input and review, and then come back to Services, Safety, and Parks. Of course, City Council as a whole would have to approve all funding from the Strategic Opportunity Fund. Question, what's our bang for the buck? That is a hard question. So we know that we are creating housing at 60% AMI or lower. We know that. We know we're creating housing for certain populations. But looking at just what happened in 2022 for the Arch Trust Fund, and the City of Bellevue also collects the 0.1% sales tax, and so they have a housing stability fund that they started to do RFPs for as well. And again, the awards per units are quite a big range. Obviously, Arch is investing in more projects that have, obviously, all of these projects have funding from other places. Bellevue is, very focused on one project that's in one of their TOD areas. So, with our $2.1 million, I can't say that we would have, X number of units, but this gives you an idea of where we may fall as far as per unit cost. And again, when we work with Arch to review how much they are suggesting for what they are putting in there, what the other funding sources are, that will come out, the recommendation will come out where they feel comfortable this makes sense for our funding. They're going to be just as good stewards of the recommendation as we will be moving forward. So I won't say we're going to get one unit for $2.1 million. I know that, but I can't tell you exactly how many. So lots of elements go into affordable housing, as we know. The biggest and brightest on this thing is property. So we don't have, besides, there is a faith-based organization that has talked about affordable housing, but there's a lot of more steps to even see if that's feasible for them. So really, we don't have vacant or unused property here waiting for this, but we do have some underutilized property, and we have some property owners that may be considering redevelopment that we haven't been talking to. So really, the pathway for our success to this is to have this fund adopted and go out and talk to people and start planting the seeds and talking about, so this is beyond Central Issaquah, right? This could be anywhere, but talking about how can we help them? And we know that our $2.1 million isn't going to fill the whole gap. How can we make those connections? How can we connect them with other resources and really be an advocate and a partner in this process as much as we can and get them to the right people to help take that to the finish line. So really excited that we have the opportunity to do this. And I'm, as much as the work that's actually taken to get to this point is going to be the beginning. And I'm looking forward to that outreach and really telling the story, what I've heard in this room over and over again, that affordable housing is important to the city. And we're willing to put some skin in the game. So again, next conversation is October 9th, the committee of the whole. And then depending on the nods or the shaking of the heads, we would either come back here or come to a full council meeting for considered adoption. Quick enough. Again, not a lot of new information, but did do some further looking at how we'd actually implement this, and can refine those, and look forward to any comments you have about that.
Questions from my fellow council? Councilmember G. Michelle. Oh, that was very generous of you. Councilmember Joe.
Oh, thank you. The question I have, I guess, is if I'm in favor generally of putting the money into a fund and making it available through the application process. The question I have, though, is if we wait another year and say double the fund to $5 million, is there an economy of scale or a type of project that would be more likely to use over $3 million rather than the smaller amount that we have, $2.1 million right now? Or does it just make sense to put the money out there? And I know that calls for a little bit of crystal ball work for you, but I'll just throw the question out and see what we come up with.
Yeah, so I wish we could double it to 2.5 or double the money. Each year we collect about $2.45 million in the 1.1% sales tax. We have a motel, and so this is actually, I should also say, this money is through 2024. So you're talking about 25 and 26 budget. We have a Motel 6 program that we are currently allocating $1.4 million over the 2 years. Will that pilot continue? Will that program become a program? Would imagine that some of the money would come out of here. So the additional money may not be as large as you can imagine, but I also do believe that we pass, let's pretend we could pass this, next month. There's not going to be somebody in November, December to come to the table and say, we're ready for this. So by the time we actually get to the point of an application, we may have the opportunity to say, the next budget round, you now allocate $1 million into this fund to add to it. So very much in our minds, and yeah, it seems like our next biennium budget conversation will be here before we know it. But I appreciate you thinking about the future. So this is a source that we could allocate future funding to be able to leverage others.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Councilmember Joe? That's a no. All right, Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for going first. I just needed to organize my thoughts here a little bit better. So I'm glad we have this up on the screen. So again, going back to the inflation issue, and we heard Mr. Rumberg say 25 to 30 is what he's seeing as well, and that's what I've been hearing from other people. So I'm looking at the TOD. We've set aside $5 million. Are we confident that that $5 million is going to be enough, which would impact the money available for this fund? So, I do support the idea of this fund. But I'm just worried that if we put money, I guess the question would be, we put money into this fund, the Strategic Opportunity Fund, and then we later find out we need it for the TOD project. Can it go backwards, or is it in the fund and it never gets out of the fund, except for the purposes that it's there for?
Right. Well, one of the purposes is TOD,
Okay.
a little TOD. So yeah, I mean, we could decide if we make them complete a full application because it's, again, we probably have all that information, but I would assume that it'll be eligible because of what we're prioritizing. And so you're right. We don't know what that $5 million, if it's going to be $4.9 million, if it's $5.1 million. Right. And we have heard over and over that the TOD project is a priority. So we would make sure that would be possible. And yeah, I'll stay.
Okay. So you use the term in here of community-based partners. You also use the term community-based organizations, which has a specific use in human services. So when I was reading that, I had the question, so let's say that someone came with the proposal for a mixed-use development. Would the let's say the bottom floor be open to for-profit businesses? Could we have a proposal that would be eligible, that would be affordable housing on top and some kind of commercial development on the bottom, or would it all have to be nonprofit? And maybe we haven't gotten that far thinking about it, but it's a question.
Yeah. So how it's defined now is so twofold. It's the nonprofit service, and they also, in our strategic plan, talks about working with faith-based organizations. I think that could be something that if we wanted to get into, again, the addendum, like if you're providing affordable housing, then it can be for-profit for-profit. Now it's a prioritization, so it's a numbers, right? And so if the benefit that you see otherwise to the community is large enough, you know, Arch, EVC, Commission, our committee, and then council could decide that it's still worth it. So, but if you want us to put something specific about the benefits, you know, commercial space is a benefit. Again, it doesn't say for-profit, nonprofit from the Central Issaquah plan. You know, keep maintaining jobs.
It just says benefit, community benefit. Yeah, that's fine right now. You know, I mean, you just kind of have to think of what are all the possible permutations that people might bring forward. Let's see. Oh, and I guess the last question, if we create this fund, are we able to leverage the funds there with the either state or federal funding, or is this going to be entirely funded by this for projects that would be just entirely, whatever our donation to the project would be ours and not be able to leverage it? Is this?
No, I anticipate they would need to have multiple sources of funding for this as most affordable housing. So yes, so I imagine that it would be able to leverage, and I think, you know, often, you know, in projects when you see investment from the city or from another entity, people feel more comfortable investing. So that's would happen with what happens with other current funding, right?
Right. Okay, I have some other comments, but that's all my questions. Thank you.
Since we're mentioning POD with a capital T, capital O, capital D, when are we expecting to get an update on that? When are we expecting forward motion on that?
Yes, so so I know that Deputy City Administrator Andrea Snyder is working on that project, and she's in a recent conversation with the King County Housing Authority just within this month to find out what's the next steps and how to come forward to council. So we can work with her unless she wants to jump on to say, I don't know that she has a plan yet, but it's don't worry, it's on our radar and continuing to.
Because we approved it some time ago.
Okay.
Right? We approved it in December.
Oh, here she's coming on.
Deputy City Administrator.
Hi, I'm coming on, but I'm not sure that my video is really coming through. There we go. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Andrea Snyder, Deputy City Administrator, and managing the capital T, capital O, capital D project for the city. Jen is, of course, correct. What I think the KCHA, King County Housing Authority, anticipates is getting a new architect firm on board, getting the developers, a new developer team after the architecture firm is confirmed, and they hope to get their entitlements or land use permits approved by the city by 2025. So there's still quite a bit of time here. Councilmember Martz, you asked what type of approval would need to come back to the city council, and that would be regarding the Opportunity Center. We would need to meet with the architecture team, and they need to figure out a lot of details to really understand what that cost estimate might be for the construction and build out of the Opportunity Center. So that's still, unfortunately, several months away. Hopefully, we can have that discussion in 2024, but it likely wouldn't occur until Q2.
Thank you for that update. I appreciate it very much.
Sure thing.
All right. With that, it sounds like we don't have any other questions at the moment, so I will ask the clerk if we have any public comment on this item.
Chair Martz, we have no members of the public in attendance.
Well, there we go. Nor do we have any in the audience with us. That makes it easy. So let us move to the deliberation phase of this item. Who wants to go first? Councilmember DiMichele.
Yes, I think this is a great idea. This is something that I've been hoping for a long time, and I think we should go forward with it. I couldn't think of anything other than the things that you had listed, Jen, that I thought were priorities. everything sort of fits, everything I thought of sort of fits into one of those categories. So I didn't have anything to add there. One of the reasons I'm going to bring it up, even though it's not related, it's related but not related. If we're talking about developing partnerships with community-based organizations, one of the things that I am discovering is that the city does not have policies or ordinances related to rental of our spaces to nonprofits. I'm sure they do, like for short term, like at Hickory Barn and things like that. But what we're talking about is long-term relationship with community-based nonprofit organizations. And if you scour our municipal code, which I have done looking for it, we have nothing. So somewhere along the line, and I brought this up with Autumn and Jeannie Justice, we've had a long conversation about it. So somewhere along the line, either in relation to this or relation to the facility study, we need to start looking at what is the city's policy toward being a landlord for nonprofit organizations. And right now, it's just a blank, at least in the ordinances it is. So I want to bring that up tonight so that we get that on the table. Other than that, again, great job. And I just think about the first project that we actually support. So yes, go forward and do good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Councilmember Joe?
Thank you. I appreciate the work that's been done to put this together. I think it's a great idea that I do support. I also think that we have the right person up at the staff level to promote this. Jen Davis Hayes, you've been doing great work in the economic development area and promoting this fund and the fact that the fund is available and going out and talking to businesses.
Councilmember Joe, you have we have glitched out on your signal. Hopefully you'll come back. Oh, that can't be good. Are you there? Oh.
Councilmember Joe, we're not hearing you. If you could deactivate your video, it appears to be a bandwidth issue on your end. So if you deactivate and just give us your verbal comments, that might facilitate things.
We see you now.
Oh, did you lose me? Sorry about that.
We did lose you. We lost about the last 60 seconds.
Okay. Well, my comment was only 60 seconds long, so I'll start from the beginning. I appreciate the work that's been done on this fund. I completely support its work. I also think that we have the right staff person at the helm for this. Jen Davis Hayes has been doing a great job in the economic development area. Great job with Lodging Tax Advisory Committee that I chair. And we do need a person that is willing to go out in the community and promote this and educate people, nonprofits and organizations about this fund and its availability. So I would encourage you to take the same approach you have taken with economic development and see this as another aspect of that that whole project to kind of make Issaquah a great place to live, work, and play. So go forth. And thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Joe. I'm just going to borrow a page from Gus Grissom and just say, do good work. My feedback. Famously told a factory full of workers, and they put a banner up. He was not a man of many words. He was a stoic, taciturn fellow. He said, do good work, and people put up a banner that said, do good work. That became their motto ever on. So yes, please do good work on this. And with that, do you have everything that you need from us?
Yes. Is there anything in particular different that you think that I should present to the full committee of the whole? This is, okay, or anything particularly you want to make sure they agree with, maybe the priorities, although we had that conversation as a whole before. So, yeah. Okay.
Councilmember Joe, you look like you're chewing on your lip. You're considering, you're thinking. Is there anything you want to add? No? No. All right. Nope, I think that's it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Oh, and with that, my computer just locked up on me because that happens. I apologize. Of course it does. Right as I'm about to say that we're ready to move on. Jen, thank you so much for shepherding both of these items today. We're moving on to ID 1454, ADA Self-Evaluation and Transition Plan with Dale Markey Crimp, Assistant to the City Administrator.
Just a moment to set my slides up.
You can sing show tunes. Really got a lot of options.
Yeah, knocking down the doors. Are you in the meeting? Okay.
Well, those first two items were supposed to take us 60 minutes, and they took us almost 2 hours. So, but you can save us if you can get it all done in 13 minutes. No, I'm not suggesting you need to get it done in 13.
Good evening. My name is Dale Markey Crimp. I am the Assistant to the City Administrator, and I'm here tonight to talk a bit about our ADA Self-Evaluation and Transition Plan. The purpose of our time together tonight is twofold. One is to, at a high level, review the draft plan, and the second is to gather some input from you all on how we might engage in progress monitoring and reporting back to council on the progress made each year towards the goals outlined in the plan. Very specifically, I'm looking to answer these two questions. What are, if any significant concerns with the proposed approach to barrier removal, the order of that removal, the timeline, and how would you like to be, as a council, kept informed of the progress on removing barriers of different types across the city over the lifespan of this plan? In particular, we'd like to hear more about the frequency of reporting and the content of that reporting. Are there any items beyond the benchmarks that are already planned that council would like to receive monitoring and updates on? I want to provide a little bit of background and context on the plan, as this is my first time coming to council to talk about the plan, but I know it's not the first time that it's been to council or committee. So the ADA, which was passed in 1990, hard to believe, only 1990, was modeled after the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of '73. But we often hear about Title I, the employment rights around the ADA. Tonight we're talking about Title II, specifically about what public entities and transportation is responsible for doing in order to make our city a more inclusive and accessible place. One of the best ways to meet the requirements of Title II of the ADA is to make your facilities, like the room we're standing in today, more accessible. That the best way to make your services and your programs more accessible is to make your spaces more accessible. However, the majority of our infrastructure predates 1990. And so while we've made a ton of progress over the last 33 years, we're simply not meeting the standards of the 1990 or even the amendments that were done in 2008 and 2014 of the ADA. We're committed, and I believe everyone in this room is committed to making this city the most inclusive and accessible place it can be. but we do have a lot of work to do to get there. The transition plan is a requirement of the Federal Highway Administration, and it's also generally a federal requirement to have one. But to obtain federal pass-through dollars from the Federal Highway Administration, we have to have a plan adopted by council and in place. The plan has two big components. One is a self-evaluation, and the other is a plan for burial removal. Also in that is a requirement to report out on the progress we make. The plan touches on 4 main areas, and you can see those in the big, bright, beautiful boxes on the screen here. Public access to city buildings, city-owned and maintained parks and paved multi-use trails, the public right-of-way, so crosswalks and intersections, and city programs, activities, and services. To give you a little bit of an update on where we've been, the process that we've taken, we've partnered with Transportation Solutions Incorporated, and we started that partnership in 2022 to do the self-assessment, to engage in an inventory and assessment of our public-facing buildings and facilities. So not the internal non-public facing, but any space a member of the public might enter. And that was 24 different buildings across the city. 29 parks and 7 multi-use trails. You'll notice that's not every park or every multi-use trail. And again, giving a read through the plan, you'll notice some were not included because they were built more recently or developed more recently. And so we figured they were within the grandfathered in standards of the most recent update. The public right-of-way, so our consultant partner evaluated all of our intersections, crosswalks, on-street marked parking, and city programs and activities and services, as well as staff knowledge about ADA, specifically Title II of the ADA. That work happened throughout 22 and 23. At the same time, we knew that we needed to have some sort of way to approach improvements that was not simply and fully based on one criterion. We wanted to have an understanding of the diverse criteria that might go into how we would order this barrier removal. I'm sure, as you notice, and as I'll go into in a moment, there's a lot of work to do, and that work is very expensive. We wanted to make sure, first and foremost, that those locations that were of most danger and of most impact to people were ones that were addressed first. And so you can see in this criteria, we've got 5 different criteria. The very first one is grievances or public complaints. We think that is the most important thing to prioritize removal. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that this plan didn't sit outside of all of the other plans that we have at the city. This should be in line with the adopted budget. It should be in line with the adopted CIP. And so the second criterion here you'll see is the inclusion in or proximity to planned capital improvement projects. The third is planned department maintenance projects and program updates, things that are already in the budget. And then 4, we also wanted to consider the severity of the non-compliance. So if an item is very out of compliance, we want to make sure that goes into the assessment and then the order of removal. And then last, but certainly not least, proximity to places of interest. We want to make sure that folks that have challenges moving around and need to get to specific support places, whether that be housing, government services, other services they may need, transportation, transit stops, shopping and entertainment, and places of public accommodation. And so you're going to notice a lot of the priorities, and as you look through the plan, I'm sure you noticed there's a real focus on downtown and central Issaquah as places where, especially for our public right-of-way, we want to make sure we address sooner rather than later. As I've mentioned a few times, the plan outlines very specifically barriers to be removed over the course of the upcoming CIP, so 2024 to 29. And then it outlines which barriers will be outstanding after that time. So you can see here on this slide, and as you saw in your memo, this is the current plan to address those barriers. We've also noted, as over the course of this year, we gathered information to see if any grievances have been made, as that was the number one criteria. We have currently no grievances on city-owned property this year, but we have established a very clear process that folks can file a grievance. Also, you'll see here the way that we prioritize barrier removal and improvements through the CIP, the budget, and pre-existing work plans. However, you'll know that this doesn't necessarily mean that only the highest priority barriers are removed first. There will be some medium and lower priority barriers that are removed before higher priority barriers because they are included within the scope of a project that's been approved as part of the CIP. To the costs. So again, we're not asking for any additional funding as part of this plan. This plan mirrors approved funding through plans that have already been approved, whether that be the budget or the CIP. There are some recommendations in the plan that we consider additional funds. For instance, transportation has an entire ADA improvements CIP project. That's the only group that does have that project. But what you can see here is our real goal is to make some meaningful, sustainable progress in addressing these barriers. What's most important is that we have a plan in place and that plan is something that we know we can commit to completing year over year. Now, progress monitoring, the other topic tonight. There is no very clear guidance on how progress must be reported. Most jurisdictions, as I did my research, do an annual written report to council, and that's about it. As we engaged with our consultant, they also recommended that we update our GIS maps annually to reflect any improvements that we make. And as we engaged with the public, and specifically as we engaged with the Transportation Advisory Board, they also recommended consideration of education that might be done at improvement or barrier removal sites. So I believe the way it was phrased was, wouldn't it be kind of cool and interesting if you walked up to a rectangular flashing beacon that was just installed and there was something that explained it? Or the next time a crosswalk talked at you, you could see a little sign that explained why it talked to you. I think what I've learned a lot as an able-bodied person working on this project is there is so much that we don't understand about the way that our world is built for able-bodied people. And so I think an opportunity to educate was something that came up when engaging our boards and commissions. Currently, the plan for reporting on this slide, these are the measures we plan to report annually. We plan to, for each barrier type, talk about the number of barriers that were removed. We also plan to report on the number of dollars spent. And we also plan to report on the percentage that we do against the benchmark that we set. So we're very clearly outlined that we plan to remove and replace or improve certain items every year. And we want to make sure that we're able to say, hey, we said we were going to do this many. We did 90% of that this year, or we did 100% of that this year. Or in fact, another maintenance project came up and we were able to do 110% of what we said we would do this year. You can see there are some little changes in here. And then of course, the most unique category is the program services and activities category, where you'll be able to see, we're going to report on the actions that we take, but we're also going to report on the number of adaptive recreation participants served by city programs, the number of ADA concerns that are submitted through See-Click-Fix, which is a new category added this year as a result of public engagement, and the number of grievances submitted. So along with the progress we're making, we'd also like to keep council apprised of generally what the experience is like for individuals with disabilities moving around our city and as they report those challenges to us. One thing I'll mention, and it was outlined pretty extensively in the memo, but I didn't provide a slide here tonight. This doesn't come to your desks without a great deal of public engagement. Not only was there a public survey that was targeted to individuals who we know experience challenges moving around our community, both through our adaptive recreation programs, our community partners, and also individuals who frequent the senior center. We also held a hybrid open house in May to garner further information and, again, targeted outreach to those groups again. Offered it as hybrid, so those who might not be able to move or parents taking care of children with disabilities could also attend. And then also in June and July, as mentioned, engaged with both the Parks Board and the Transportation Advisory Board around the draft plan and also the criteria that I presented this evening. And so tonight, there are 2 items and 2 options. One is the plan itself, and the options are to provide some minor suggestions or changes and approve this to move forward for full council consideration in late October, or to instruct us to make some substantial changes and return to committee with an updated plan. For progress monitoring and reporting, the options are to approve the current reporting plan with minor changes. That might be an addition of a measure or 2 that you'd like to see that you didn't see in that matrix or table. And then to instruct us to determine more frequent reporting cadence, a number of different reporting items, things that you feel like are truly missing before we can bring this forward for full council consideration. The recommendation from the administration is to move this forward to the full council, and specifically for progress monitoring, we do the GIS update, we track quarterly, we provide you an annual report, and that we consider some projects that might be really good candidates for some educational signage, especially around public right-of-way. The timing and next steps from this meeting, hopefully, we'll finalize the plan. I know you've seen some references to appendices that are in a little bit of draft mode. We didn't want to overburden our GIS system too much before we were ready to say we're ready to move forward. But the hope is to return to full council for adoption in October, begin quarterly progress monitoring at the end of this year, and provide an annual report in Q1 of 2025.
Do you have anything else to present?
I do not.
So I have a question. What about our existing?
That is a great question. So our existing plan, we did begin writing a plan in 2014. And I think what you'll see in some of the appendices, we actually hired a different consultant, and they did a pretty robust self-assessment of many of our facilities across the city. My understanding is that plan was never enacted. It did not lead, I think largely because it was one plan next to a bunch of other plans, and so it wasn't fully integrated into our CIP. Where we've seen the most progress on items that were pulled out in that plan is actually in public right-of-way. I think we've seen year over year a lot of those improvements being made. And of course, little changes were happening along the way, but I was not able to find the full 2014 draft plan.
I believe it was 2013, but it was referred to as the 2013 plan in a number of places. I was on council, and it was about $60 million like this one is. So in real dollars, that's less because $60 million doesn't buy you as much today as it did 10 years ago, unfortunately. But we had a plan. I think it was required for the feds in 2013 as well. So I don't remember the vote to adopt it, but I remember having it in committee because it was in the Transportation Committee, which I was chairing at the time, because it was mostly about curbs. And it was about how ridiculously expensive curbs are to retrofit. And I think that formed the bulk of the $60 million, honestly. So I do, if and when this comes back to council, I think we should at least have a cursory nod to the existing plan. And if we didn't adopt it, I'm surprised because, again, I would be surprised the feds would allow us to not adopt something. But, it's... Okay, that was I guess I will say, you answered my question. Councilmember DeMichelle, Councilmember Joe, questions before we review it? Oh, yeah, Councilmember DeMichelle.
Yeah, and I think you've done a great job on community engagement and so forth, but I'm just wondering if you sent this in front of the Equity Board. Not so much, I think it's a great plan, and I think that's, great. but I bet they would be interested to see it. So I'm just wondering if that has happened or if you plan to do that in the future.
A great question. It has not yet gone before the it has not gone before the equity board in its current form. It went through the equity board. It went to the equity board very early in its inception, but my hope is also to bring it back to them around, specifically again around this sort of educational public engagement component.
Yes, I think they'd have a lot to say.
Member Joe, do you have any questions before we? Yes, there, Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. The little challenge that we had at the beginning of the school year by Issaquah High School and Issaquah Middle School along 2nd Avenue when we were doing some construction. I'm not giving blame to anybody, but it looks like late spring to early fall is when we typically want to do these type of projects. You asked if we had any suggestions for timelines. I know that we do this. I know that we look at, doing construction around schools in the summertime and the off season as much as possible. And I understand that this was a contract dispute or a little bit of a problem with the bidding requirements, but I would just like to convey that there are a number of parents that contacted me about the delay there, and I would hope that when we do these public right-of-way improvements as part of this plan, that we would anticipate the start of school or other big events along the way, and I trust that you'll do that as a person who is wed to data and wants to see that whole picture along the way, but I would just express that sentiment that I heard from a number of people out there. I think it's great that we're doing some improvements to parks. It looks like Tradition Plateau in the plan was a high priority, but I was just curious. It seems to me that when I'm up there, I can go on most of the trails without, any type of grade, or it's either gravel or it's at least solid ground. Are we talking about making all the trails accessible there? Or are we just talking about making the parking lot and entry accessible? Just a little question about one of the particular projects.
That's a great question, Councilmember Joe, and your earlier sentiment is noted too around timeline for some of these improvements. The priority is around the parking lot and the parking in the entrance to the space. The ABA, which is actually a different set of standards that dictates mixed-use trails and parks, all under the umbrella of accessibility. Those standards they're different, and the priority, without pulling up the report in front of you, the priority is really around the parking. Not every single trail in the community needs to be fully accessible. That's the point, is that everyone could have access to a similar experience. It doesn't mean that, you think about this, there are trails that absolutely can't be made accessible. There are slopes that are just, we're not going to be able to make those ones that folks can move around. But Tradition Plateau, given the ability to get onto it through not a steep entrance from some angles, makes it a good candidate for us to think about accessibility of that particular trail. But you'll also notice, you noted, yes, it's a high priority, but if we look closer also at the order of the work, we're really focused on being able to get into the space within parks and trails. And so it is really a focus on the parking lot.
Thank you for that. As a trailhead community, I want us to make sure that we're setting expectations correctly when it's in the plan. And if someone reads it, we want to make sure that they understand that it's merely parking and access to the general facility and not access to all the trails. So I appreciate that information. That concludes my questions. Thank you.
I don't see any other questions. And we still, do we continue to not have any members of the public attending electronically?
That would be correct.
All right. Well, then we have no opportunity for public comment at the moment, so we can go straight to deliberation. Can you bring up the questions that you were looking for the answers for again, Dale? There we go. Are there any significant concerns with the proposed barrier removal framework, order, and timeline? And then how would we like to be kept? Councilmember Joe, do you want to kick us? Yeah, there's your hand.
Yep, there you go. I'll go first. No, I appreciate the thought that's been put in this plan. I think that the framework is fine for the removal. The order is fine. It looks like you've given some thought to the timeline and the construction time when those projects will be done. So I do appreciate that. I think that annual reporting would be sufficient. If there are quarterly map updates, may not be necessary unless there are a number of changes. And I'll kind of leave that to you and the administration to judge. If there's only one change on a, that we've done over the time period, perhaps not producing an expensive map, an expensive report would be both a time saver and a better use of public funds. I'll leave that to the administration to think about, but it's not always necessary in my mind, from my point of view, to have a sophisticated map all the time as we go. So I think the benchmarks you've got there are great, and look forward to seeing the plan implemented and put into action. Thank you.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Right, I agree. I wouldn't have any significant concerns, and I would forward it for approval to the whole council. I guess the question we might think about is, should it go on consensus or should it go on as a discussion? And that perhaps depends on what else is being proposed for that agenda. But I don't have any significant concerns. I think yearly reporting is sufficient, and I agree with Councilmember Joe that it depends on how much work was done, and is it important to produce a report, or is it a waste of money? So yeah, and I think the items that you've identified to report on are just fine. Great. Yeah, looks good.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Yeah, I'm generally good with the framework order. I mean, the timeline is, if we take it from 62 million to 55 million over the next 7 years, I will have long shuffled off this mortal coil before we get to everything done. But that was true a decade ago. I'd like to see us continue to make progress. I don't know if in the last decade, if we were to dig up the 2013 report and compare where we are today, I'm not sure how much progress we've made, and that's disconcerting. So I would like to understand. I mean, I really want us to make some progress on this, right? Not just say, here's some things we could do over the next 7 years, but actually make some progress. In terms of whether it comes back on consent or not, I guess it really depends on the answer for me to that question, on whether there's something there that if there's going to be an ask of council down the road, if you just think that as a result of the natural order of what the city does, that we're going to reduce $7 million of that outstanding need, then maybe it goes on consent. But if we think down the road that there's going to be an ask of council or something to that extent, then I would like to see something back before the full council. In terms of generally reporting, I think annual reporting is. Any other comments? Russell, Councilmember Joe, Councilmember DiMichele. Gail, do you have what you wanted from us?
I do. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, is there anything for the good of the order from either of my fellow council members? Nope. Then this meeting is adjourned at 8:43 p.m. And thank you. If you're at home and you've been watching the meeting, thank you for joining us. And if you're watching it later, thanks for watching.